All right, how's everybody doing today? Hotep, hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecturer, writer, and historian. So it is Tuesday, June 1st, 2021, and we are live. We know this is the 100th anniversary of the attack on the Greenwood district in Tulsa, North Tulsa, where Black Wall Street was, May 31st and June 1st, 2021, 100th anniversary. So I wanted to, earlier today, I saw this story, and I already, we've been talking about this day after day on my show that comes on 6 nights a week, Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. to 12 midnight Eastern Standard Time, the African History Network show. And we've been talking about the Tulsa Race Massacre and different aspects of it. And I did a lecture dealing with the Tulsa Race Massacre back in 2014, a 2.5-hour lecture. So if you've been watching my show, I talked about that President Joe Biden was going to be in Tulsa on Tuesday, June 1st, for the commemoration. And he was going to meet with survivors and things like this. So the information came out early today that while Biden is there in Tulsa, he's going to also unveil a plan, unveil some things to combat the racial wealth gap. All right. So I've gone through and looked at it from different sources. Now, on May 31st, he issued a proclamation declaring a day of remembrance. May 31st, a day of remembrance, because of the 100th commemoration because 100 years since the Tulsa Race Massacre. And I went through and read that entire proclamation as well. And then it starts talking about combating systemic racism, and it gives a pretense of the plan he's going to unveil and agenda he's going to unveil today. So we're going to go through this and break this down step by step. Okay. How's everybody doing? I'm going to show this information to you. And this is not all that we want, but these are some things on that, agenda that we want. Okay, so let's jump into this. How's everybody doing? Share this on your social media platforms. Invite your friends to tune in also. First, we're going to, I'm going to show you articles from Axios.com, Washington Post, as well as CNN. First, we're going to look at the actual proclamation and briefly look at the proclamation because I want to highlight some things in it. All right. How's everybody doing? Share this broadcast on your social media platforms. Invite your friends to tune in as well. And also, if you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App. Then also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. Okay. And I encourage people to actually read before you come here with dumbass comments, because I can tell what you haven't read when you make comments like that. Okay. Watch my show Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. to 12 midnight Eastern Standard Time, and Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the African History Network show, because we go through and break this information down. I'm not just a historian, I also study politics. So let's look at this proclamation here. All proclamations and executive orders from a president you can read at whitehouse.gov. So I encourage people to actually read them at whitehouse.gov. So let's look at this. I want to focus in on paragraphs 5 and 6. Okay, I want to focus in on paragraphs 5 and 6. So they start about, so this was issued May 31st, 2021. So Biden declared May 31st a day of remembrance. And he encouraged Americans to focus in, and the article from Axios.com deals with this. He said he wanted Americans to reflect on this solemn centennial, the quote, deep roots of racial terror in our nation, and recommit to the work of rooting out systemic racism across our country, end quote. All right. So I encourage people to like follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network. Follow me on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, Imhotep. Okay, because you're gonna the type of information and type of evidence I show you is going to be different than what you get in other places. And as I tell people, you don't have to believe a word that I say. Proper documentation ends all conversation. You can go research this yourself. Okay, so let's look at this here. It's proclamation. So they start out talking about what was in Black Wall Street, 35 square blocks of thriving Black community. The attack, May 31st, June 1st, 300 Americans killed, nearly 10,000 left destitute, etc. Okay, so that's paragraphs 1. Then you go to paragraph 2. Before the Tulsa race massacre, there was a thriving, Greenwood was a thriving Black community that had grown into a proud economic cultural hub. Many of Greenwood's 10,000 residents were Black sharecroppers who fled racial violence after the Civil War. So then they go to paragraph 3. Paragraph 3, I want to zoom in on this here. He says the community was home to a growing number of prominent Black entrepreneurs, as well as working class Black families who shared a commitment to social social activism and economic opportunity. As Greenwood grew, Greenwood Avenue teamed with successful Black-owned businesses, including restaurants, grocery stores, hotels, and offices for doctors, lawyers, and dentists. The community maintained its own school system, post office, and savings and loan institution, hospital, and bus and taxi service. Okay. Now, despite the rise in Jim Crow, paragraph 4, despite the rise in Jim Crow systems, the re-emergence of the Ku Klux Klan had largely died out by 1915, but the Klan, there's going to be a resurgence of the Klan because of the movie The Birth of a Nation, which debuted February 8th, 1915. The Ku Klux Klan are shown as the heroes of the movie. And then you're going to have a reincarnation of the Klan introduced in October 1915 by the Reverend William Joseph Simmons. The Reverend William Joseph Simmons introduces this reincarnation of the Ku Klux Klan after seeing the movie The Birth of a Nation. And this brings about a second wave of the Klan and a resurgence of them. And they're going to grow in the 1920s, okay, or from 1915 on and then continue into the 1950s, the 1920s. They're going to grow in dominance, and you had a growing number of Klans members in Oklahoma. All right, let's continue here. So this made the community a source of pride, etc. In 2 days, a violent mob. It also made the neighborhood and his family a target of white supremacists. In 2 days, a violent mob tore down the hard-fought success of Black Wall Street that had taken more than a decade to build. Okay, paragraph 5. In the years that followed, the destruction caused by the mob was followed by laws and policies that made recovery nearly impossible. In the aftermath of the attack, local ordinances were passed requiring new construction standards that were prohibitively expensive, meaning Black families could not rebuild. Now, you know, we've talked about that here on this show, and attorney B.C. Franklin, father of John Hope Franklin, actually sued, and his law office was destroyed. He set up a law office in a tent. This article here from face-to-faceafrica.com deals with this. Hannibal B. Johnson also talks about this in his book that I read some years ago, dealing with the history of Black Wall Street. Hannibal B. Johnson is one of the top historians when it comes to Tulsa and Greenwood and Black Wall Street. And he's been interviewed a number of times. He's in the documentary from the History Channel, the documentary from PBS, the one from CNN, and he was on MSNBC today as well. So some of you all saw my Facebook post. I posted he was interviewed by Jeff Bennett on MSNBC. But if you look at this article here, Tulsa Massacre, this attorney lost everything but went on to defend survivors by setting up office in a tent. This attorney lost everything, but went on to defend survivors by setting up office in a tent. And this tells the story of attorney B.C. Franklin, who's the father of historian, African American historian John Hope Franklin. And this is B.C. Franklin on the right with the glasses. He set up an office in a tent, and he handled these cases, and they sued the city of Tulsa, and they were able to win the right to rebuild because the city of Tulsa put in an ordinance that stated that the new structures after the 1921 race massacre, the city of Tulsa passed a ordinance stating that new structures being built had to be fireproof or something like that. It would have been much more expensive to rebuild. So they sued and they won. He fought this case from a tent. All right. It's a fantastic story. Hannibal B. Johnson has one of the best books dealing with the history of Black Wall Street. Black Wall Street from riot to Renaissance in Tulsa's historic Greenwood district. All right. So when I was doing my research for my 2.5-hour lecture dealing with the history of Black Wall Street, this was one of my sources for it. In my lectures at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, I got a cover of it right here. I did this in 2014, Black Wall Street from Destruction to the Resurrection of Economic Empowerment. It's a 2.5-hour lecture that I did. I did this in Seattle, Washington. I was speaking at a bookstore in Seattle. I'm doing a PowerPoint presentation, and we deal with a timeline of history leading up to the attack. We deal with some background history on Tulsa. It's a lot of information there. So that's at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right, let's continue. So they talk about in the proclamation here, Biden talks about the in the aftermath of the attack, local ordinances were passed requiring new construction standards that were prohibitively expensive, meaning many Black families could not rebuild. Later, Greenwood was redlined by mortgage companies. Redlined by mortgage companies. Now, once again, you've heard me talk about redlining. That started with the federal government coming from the Homeowners Loan Corporation in 1933 and the Federal Housing Administration about 1934 or so. And redlining, you're going to see that start up around some sources say 1937. Okay, redlining, which is discriminating against African Americans being able to move into certain areas, as well as get mortgages, as well as get insurance on homes, on businesses. Okay, this is originally coming from the federal government. So Greenwood was redlined by mortgage companies and deemed hazardous by the federal government. Deemed hazardous by the federal government, so that Black homeowners could not access home loans or credit on equal terms. So this is we're not just talking about the city of Tulsa. We're not just talking about the state of Tulsa. We're talking about the federal government. Okay, this happened all across the country in many areas where African Americans were trying to move into. This happened in Detroit. Okay, we're dealing with the federal government. And in later decades, federal investment, including federal highway construction, tore down and cut off parts of the community. The attack on Black families and Black wealth in Greenwood persisted across generations. So if you've been watching my show, I've been dealing with how, one, we rebuilt Black Wall Street after the Tulsa Race Massacre. I've been talking about that for years. We rebuilt Black Wall Street, and it was bigger and better than it was previously. It was thriving again in 1926. Dr. W.B. Du Bois visited Tulsa in 1926 and wrote about how Tulsa was thriving again. Okay, it was 1950s and 60s. Tulsa was bigger and better. Okay, we rebuilt it and we got help. There was about 50 African American townships in Tulsa. Okay, I'm sorry, in Oklahoma. There's about 50 African American townships in Oklahoma. So we got help from them as well. Okay, to rebuild. Well, the expressways come through starting in about 1970. Interstate 244 and then US 75 freeway. They come through and they run through, wipe out a lot of our businesses, and our homes are taken through eminent domain. Okay, so this devastates Greenwood a second time after we rebuilt it. This devastates Greenwood a second time. Well, you're dealing with the federal government. Okay, you're dealing with local government, but you're also dealing with the federal government. If you look at this article from NBCnews.com, we've talked about it here the past few days. So be sure to go back in and watch my broadcast are archived on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network, my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, because I talked about was the attack on Black Wall Street planned, because many historians and researchers think the attack was planned. Tulsa's Greenwood neighborhood found prosperity after the 1921 massacre. Then the highways arrived. And this is Carlos Moreno, who you see, he was in the documentary from the History Channel, Tulsa Race Massacre 1921. He was in that documentary, and you've seen him interviewed on MSNBC. Okay. He has a new book coming out called The Victory of Greenwood. But here in the article, it says Black Tulsa, this is quoting Dr. W.B. Du Bois in 1926, when Du Bois visits Tulsa. Dr. W.B. Du Bois wrote, Black Tulsa is a happy city. It has new clothes. It is young and gay and strong. Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois wrote after a 1926 visit. He went on to say, quote, 5 little years ago, fire and blood and robbery leveled it to the ground. Scars are there, but the city is impudent and noisy. It believes in itself. Thank God for the grit of Black Tulsa, end quote. Okay, so we rebuilt it with our own dollars and help from African Americans. We didn't get help from the city government. We didn't get help from the state government. The insurance companies didn't pay out on insurance claims on our businesses, our homes. Okay, and the city government there in Tulsa blamed the African Americans for the riot. They said it was Black agitators, Black instigators that caused the race massacre. We got blamed for it. Now, by the 1950s and 60s, Greenwood had blossomed into one of the most successful Black neighborhoods in the country. At its height, Black business owners operated 40 grocery stores and dozens of confectionaries across the mixed-use 35-block community. Now, today, they don't have any grocery stores there. We have 40 Black-owned grocery stores, okay, in the 1950s and 60s. Now they don't have any. It's a food desert. Okay. And Carlos Moreno goes on to say, and now what do you see? As he stood above the expressway, he said, it's just highways. That's it. There's nothing else. Okay. So then they talk about Interstate 244 that comes through. So read the rest of this article. It gives you some background history, and it talks about how we rebuilt it, but it deals with the devastation that came through with the interstate highways. And you're dealing with the U.S. Interstate Highway Act of 1952 and 1956 that drove about 41,000 miles of interstate highway across the country. And it runs through somewhere around 1,600 African-American communities. All right. If you read the book, How White Folks Got So Rich, The Untold Story of American White Supremacy, How White Folks Got So Rich, The Untold Story of American White Supremacy, it deals with this as well. And then also, if you read Black Labor, White Wealth with Dr. Claude Anderson, one of my teachers, because I've interviewed Doc a number of times throughout the years, he talks about this as well in Black Labor, White Wealth. All right, let's continue. How's everybody doing? Share this broadcast on your social media platforms. Invite your friends to tune in as well. Okay. Let's continue. All right. So read this full article here. This gives you some background information on Tulsa, and then how it was devastated by the interstate highways. Okay, which you're dealing with federal government. That's Tulsa's Greenwood neighborhood found prosperity after the 1921 massacre, and the highways arrived. That's from NBCnews.com. That is from May 26, 2021, by Graham Lee Brewer. Okay. Let's continue. I want to go back to proclamation here. All right. So then it says, and in later decades, federal investment, including federal highway construction, tore down and cut off parts of the community. The attack on Black families and Black wealth in Greenwood persisted across generations. Okay, that's paragraph 5. Paragraph 6, the federal government must reckon with and acknowledge the role that it has played in stripping wealth and opportunity from Black communities. The federal government must reckon with and acknowledge the role that it has played in stripping wealth and opportunity from Black communities. Now, this deals with understanding how racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race. This also deals with why understanding history is so important. Because when you have people in political office, like whether they're in the state legislature in Texas, whether they are in the state legislature in Michigan, whether they're dealing with the state legislature in Georgia, when you have dumbasses in political office, especially Republicans, and I'm neither Republican nor Democrat, but I'm a historian, I study politics. When you have dumbasses in political office, like what they're trying to do in Texas right now with the voter restriction bills, what the state legislature did with Senate Bill 202 in Georgia, okay, and that was backed by Heritage Action, which is a organization that's backed by the Heritage Foundation, okay, and Rebecca Anderson, Mother Jones, released the video of Rebecca Anderson, executive direction of Heritage Action, talking about how they crafted these voter restriction bills and why they spread so quickly to 47 state legislatures. This was orchestrated, okay? And it talked about how they were putting pressure on governors like Governor Brian Kemp, a governor, to immediately sign it as soon as it passes the state legislature, et cetera. Go research that. Jessica Anderson, executive director of Heritage Action. We dealt with that here on the show as well, so you can go back in the archives and look at that. All right, let's continue. So he goes on to say so this is dealing with systemic racism and understanding racism as a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race, and understanding how laws and understanding laws and policies. And politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. This also ties into something that critical race theory is attempting to address, dealing with how laws and policies are used to perpetuate racism and target non-white people, especially African Americans, and oppress us. This is something that critical race theory addresses, but you have now about 13 states that have banned critical race theory and teaching it in schools, teaching it in schools, etc. Okay, even though there was no real effort to teach critical race theory K through 12. That's usually taught in college at the graduate level and in law school. There's no real effort to teach critical race theory like in middle school, high school. Okay, what's taking place is you have a lot of white Republicans who, and some African American Republicans, like former state representative Vernon Jones out of Georgia, okay, who is running for governor of Georgia, and said if he's elected, he's going to write an executive order that bans the teaching of critical race theory in Georgia. But when he was interviewed by Dr. Mark Lamont Hill on the Black News Channel, Dr. Mark Lamont Hill asked him a number of times, please explain to me what critical race theory is, and he couldn't explain it. So we just saw it banned in Oklahoma, where Tulsa is. Governor Kevin Stitt, Republican, just signed a bill that bans the teaching of critical race theory, and it limits what they can teach about racism and systemic racism, things like this. We've talked about that here on this show. Okay. So we're here 6 days a week, usually Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. to 12 midnight Eastern Standard Time. So be sure to tune in. Follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. Turn on notifications so you know when we go live. Follow me on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep. Turn on notifications so you know when we go live as well. All right, let's continue. And let me see. I think I have. We have any of them up? Okay. I was trying to see if I had any of them pulled up dealing with Oklahoma. Um, for instance, we just talked about this article here a few days ago. Let me flip over to this one here. Teachers worry Oklahoma's ban on systemic racism lessons could put job at risk. Teachers worry Oklahoma's ban on systemic racism lessons could put jobs at risk. Oklahoma's new law, which does not specify consequences for teachers who violate it, is one of many across the country targeting the study of racism's legacy. Okay, if you really don't want to teach about racism, and also you have states cracking down on like what can be taught about the history of slavery in schools. Well, if you don't want to deal with this from a historical perspective, right? How do you address it? If you really don't want to teach about systemic racism, how do you correct it? You have to teach about this in school. You don't. The goal of teaching about this in school is not to make white children feel guilty. The goal is to change the trajectory of the future and correct the racial the structural inequities. What happens is that you have people that don't want to talk about it because they want to keep things the way they are because they benefit from it. They may not want to admit that they benefit from it, but they benefit from it. So they want to keep things the way they are. So they don't want to talk about it because if you start talking about it, then people are gonna realize, well, wait a second, hold on. Okay, now we see what's wrong. Now what are we gonna do to correct it? So they don't even want to have that conversation. And then there was one from ABC News that we talked about recently. This dealt with, let me see. This dealt with Oklahoma governor signs ban on teaching critical race theory. Okay, now most Republicans can't tell you what critical race theory is. What they do is that just becomes a catch-all for anything dealing with race they don't want to talk about. But they may want to talk about the Confederacy and Confederate Remembrance Day, Confederate History Day, whatever they call it in different states. They may want to talk about that. But critical race theory becomes a catch-all for them to be able to attack, and they love to attack the 1619 Project also. Okay, critical race theory becomes a catch-all for them to be able to attack, to just lump into it things that they don't like dealing with racism and history. This is from abcnews.go.com. From ABC News, Oklahoma governor signs ban on teaching critical race theory. So read that article also. All right, now let me go back to this one here. Okay, this is paragraph 6. I'm going back to the proclamation that was issued May 31st, 2021, a proclamation on Day of Remembrance, 100 years after the 1921 Tulsa race massacre. Okay, so the federal government must reckon with and acknowledge the role that it has played in stripping wealth and opportunity from Black families. It goes on to say the Biden-Harris administration is committed to acknowledging the role federal policy played in Greenwood and other Black communities and addressing long-standing racial inequities through historic investments in the economic security of children and families, programs to provide capital for small businesses, in economically disadvantaged areas, including minority-owned businesses, and ensuring that infrastructure projects increase opportunity, advance racial equity and environmental justice, and promote affordable access. Okay, this is paragraph 6. This deals with addressing structural inequities. It's addressing racial inequities. Okay, to address it, you have to acknowledge that it exists. This is why understanding the history is so important, because the history tells you how you got to this point, the laws and policies that were put in place to maldistribute wealth palm resources, how you got to this point so you can understand what has to be corrected. So paragraph, that's paragraph 7. We can skip over most of that. That's just dealing with testimony from Mother Fletcher, Viola Fletcher. Okay. Paragraph 7. With this proclamation, I commit to the survivors of the Tulsa Race Massacre, including Viola Fletcher, who's 107 years old, her brother Hughes Van Ellis, her little brother, he's 100 years old. Right? That's her little brother, and Leslie Benningfield Randall, who's 100 years. She's 106. Leslie Benningfield Randall is 106. Hughes Van Ellis is 100. The descendants of victims, and to this nation that we will never forget. We honor the legacy of the Greenwood community and of Black Wall Street by reaffirming our commitment to advance racial justice through the whole of our government and working to root out systemic racism from our laws, our policies, and our hearts. Okay, so read this. This is from May 31st, 2021. Okay, so Biden sent out this proclamation declaring May 31st as a day of remembrance, because of the Tulsa Race Massacre. Now, one of the interesting things here, and I don't know what they're saying on Fox News, but Biden said he wants Americans to reflect on this solemn centennial, the deep roots of racial terror in our nation, and recommit to the work of rooting out systemic racism across the country. Let me see something here. Is that in here? Can I pull that up? Yeah, okay. That's paragraph 1. Yeah, that's paragraph 1. I call on American people to reflect on the deep roots of racial terror in our nation and recommit to the work of rooting out systemic racism across our country. All right. So read this. You can read all executive orders, proclamations, etc. at whitehouse.gov. And when bills are passed, they also have fact sheets. Even before they're passed, oftentimes they have fact sheets at whitehouse.gov, so you can actually read what's in the actual bill. Okay, so you don't have to listen to people talk about a bill who ain't read what's in the bill. You can actually go read this stuff for yourself. Whitehouse.gov, and then Congress.gov. You can read the actual bills coming from the House of Representatives and U.S. Senate. You can read all those at Congress.gov, whether they pass or not. Okay, you can read them at Congress.gov. All right. So let's continue here. Now, I want to, there was an article from Axios.com that gave a preview of what's going to take place. And then I want to look at the actual policies. I just want to give you this background information because I know people are coming with different levels of understanding and different knowledge bases. All right, this is from today. This is June 1st. Which one is this? This is that June 1st or May 31st? They don't have the data. It's May 31st. Biden proclaims Day of Remembrance on 100th anniversary of Tulsa Massacre. Okay, this is from Axios.com. And then they have a tweet from the White House. But I want to go to down here. What else is he saying? Biden said with the proclamation, he was committing to the descendants and survivors. Okay, we got that. to the descendants and survivors of the rampage of white supremacists who killed as many as 300 African Americans. Okay. Um, okay, we honor the legacy of Greenwood by reaffirming commitment to advance racial justice through the whole of our government and the whole of our and working to root out systemic racism from our laws, our policies, and our hearts. Okay. The federal government must reckon with and acknowledge the role that it has played in stripping wealth and opportunity from Black communities. All right. This one here from Axios just gave a brief synopsis of the Day of Remembrance and of the proclamation that I just showed you. All right. Now, there's another one from Axios, and then we're going to look at the one from the Washington Post and then CNN, because Washington Post has more details. But I just want to, this one here from Axios gives a skeleton of it. This deals with unveiling the plan to combat the racial wealth gap. Okay. Biden unveils plans to combat racial wealth gap on anniversary of Tulsa Massacre. All right. This is from June 1st, 2021. And let me look at my notes on this here. Okay. So let me blow this up for you all so you can see this. Okay. So the president will tour the Greenwood Cultural Center with Housing and Urban Development Secretary Marcia Fudge, White House Domestic Policy Czar Susan Rice, and Public Engagement Director Cedric Richmond, who used to be in the House of Representatives out of Louisiana. Details: the initiatives will target home ownership and small business ownership, which the White House called two key wealth creators for communities of color: home ownership and small business ownership. Quote, because disparities in wealth compound like an interest rate, the disinvestment in Black communities in Tulsa and across the country throughout our history is still felt sharply today, the White House said in a statement. Now, the Department of Housing and Urban Development will publish two new rules. This is just part of it here. The Department of Housing and Urban Development, and let me see how this looks here. Let me blow this up here. Let's blow this up a little bit more. Okay, the Department of Housing and Urban Development will publish two new rules that will align federal enforcement practice with the Fair Housing Act and provide a legal framework for HUD, Housing and Urban Development, to require public and private entities to rethink established practices that contribute to or perpetuate inequities. All right. Now, this is a reversal from the Trump administration, by the way. We'll talk about that in a minute. Biden will also direct HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge to lead an interagency effort to address inequities in housing appraisals, which is huge because we talked about stories here dealing with housing appraisals. We just talked about one out of Illinois where the sister had a white man sit in for her and during the housing appraisal, and the housing appraisal came back. Actually, this one was more than double what the previous one was. Okay. She got housing appraisals of $125,000, $110,000. Her name is Carlette Duffy. We talked about that here on this show. And when Carlette Duffy had, she talked to one of her girlfriends who's married to a white man. She took down, she saw an article from the New York Times, and we talked about this article here before. And in this article from the New York Times, an interracial couple took down their uh, pictures of non-white relatives and took down books from African American authors, things like this, and they saw their housing appraisal increase. So Carlette Duffy did the same thing. Okay, and on her third housing appraisal, the first one was 125,000, the second one was 110,000. The third housing appraisal was $259,000, and she had a white man sit in for her, basically as the homeowner, and it looked like somebody white owned the home, and the housing appraisal more than double. Okay, so there was this article here. Uh, NBC News had this article as well, and a number of news sources. I first saw it from the Griot.com. Pull this up. So this is the type of systemic racism we're talking about. Okay, we'll look at this article here. And you can Google her name. And there was one from a Fox News affiliate there in Indianapolis. The first article I saw about this was from the Griot.com. All right. Okay, after she doubled, hold on, let me go back over to this. I have a bunch of tabs open. Okay, after she concealed her race, Black Indianapolis owner's home value more than doubled. After she concealed her race, Black Indianapolis owner's home value more than doubled. The homeowner suspected race played a role in her first two low appraisals. Now her experiences are part of complaints with federal housing authorities. All right, so read this one here also. And the Griot had a good article about this as well. This is about Carlette Duffy. 125,000. Duffy's home, which was assessed by different companies last year in 2020, first appraised at $125,000, then $110,000, and finally $259,000 in November 2020, according to the Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana. Also, we've dealt with how African American homes are valued at $146 billion less than comparable white homes. African American homes are valued at $146 billion less than comparable white homes. There was a study from the Brookings Institute, the study from the Brookings Institute. And there's an article from curb.com that deals with this. This one here, how a segregation tax is costing Black American homeowners $156 billion. Okay, a new Brookings Institute Gallup report finds residential property in majority Black neighborhoods is consistently undervalued. Now, this article is from November 27th, 2018. All right, and this deals with the segregation tax. All right, according to the study called the devaluation of assets in Black neighborhoods, the case for residential property, owner-occupied homes are undervalued by the real estate market across all majority Black neighborhoods and consistently sell or are appraised for lower prices at an average of $48,000 per home. Nationwide, this amounts to $156 billion in cumulative losses, what the report dubs a segregation tax. This directly negatively impacts African American wealth. This directly negatively impacts African American wealth, dealing with this systemic racism when it comes to home appraisals. Okay. And that's what this policy is addressing. Okay, so read this full article here. How a segregation tax is costing Black American homeowners $156 billion. All right. And this is $156 billion less in wealth, dealing with home appraisals. Okay. And I'll post these links when we're, most of these when we're done. Here, let me give you a couple of these here that you can read. Okay. And you don't have to take my word for any of this. You can go read this stuff yourself. That's why I give you the articles. I want you to go read this. You don't have to believe me. Proper documentation ends all conversation. All right. Then we have, okay, let's go back to this one here. That was from Axios. Then I want to look at this extensive article from Washington Post that I read dealing with this. And then there was one from CNN. CNN just had a couple of things in it that the one from the Washington Post did not have. So you all should, hopefully you all can see this also. I blew it up for you. I want you all to see this as well. Okay, Biden will also direct HUD Secretary Marshall Fudge to lead an interagency effort to address inequities in housing appraisals, which directly attacks African American wealth. Using quote, potential enforcement. Let me pull this up here. Okay. Using potential enforcement under fair housing laws, regulatory action, and development of standards and guidance. Using quote, potential enforcement under fair housing laws, regulatory action, and development of standards and guidance. The administration, let me see here. The administration said it will increase the share of federal contracts directed to small disadvantaged businesses by 50% by 2026, by the year 2026. Increase the share of federal contracts directed to small disadvantaged businesses by 50% by 2026, seeking to lower barriers to entry and allow more, quote, traditionally underserved entrepreneurs to compete, end quote. Allow more traditionally underserved entrepreneurs to compete. Okay, this right here can potentially be huge if people take advantage of it. Well, why do I say that? Well, now I'm somebody that used to manage an African American owned company, actually two of them. And we had contracts. We had city contracts, county contracts, and state of Michigan contracts. And I helped us get a lot of those contracts. I took us through the recertification process because you have to be a certified vendor of the county, of the state, of the city to be able to bid on contracts. You can't just you can't just jump up and say, "Hey, we can do this. We want to bid on the contract." No, there's a process that you have to go through to become a authorized vendor of a municipality, of a city, county, or state, or federal government before you can even bid on contracts. A lot of times, African American owned businesses can't bid on the contracts because the paperwork's not in order. Usually when you bid on contracts, well, usually to become a vendor, they want maybe tax returns for the last 3 years. I remember with the county of Wayne, when there was a change in Wayne County executives. Wayne County is the county that Detroit is in, where I live. Okay. So I remember when there was a change in Wayne County executives from the Ed McNamara administration to the Robert Fulcano administration. There was a change in the process to become a vendor for the county of Wayne. There was a change in the process to go through the recertification process, because you have to go through a recertification process usually. And like we had certifications as a small business enterprise. They had one for like minority owned businesses also. So we had different certifications, which gave us a certain amount of points on bids that we contract on. Okay, that we on contracts that we bid on, I should say, on contracts that we bid on. So I remember when a new administration came in, county administration, there were changes to the whole process to become a vendor or go through the recertification process. Oftentimes, African American owned businesses can't bid on contracts because, and I'm not saying all of them, of course, I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of times, many of us get knocked out of that because the paperwork isn't right to be able to become a vendor so that you can take advantage of opportunities like this. So we need to get with our African American chambers of commerce, and there may be other entities that help in this. I'm just saying that's one, because oftentimes a lot of them will help African American owned businesses get the paperwork correct. But also, you want to talk to whoever your member of the House of Representatives is, whatever congressional district you're in. I'm in the 14th congressional district, Brenda Lawrence. You want to talk to them because a lot of times they have information on these contracts. And guess what? They want to have success stories in their districts. So they're looking for, oftentimes they're looking for businesses that they can help and get information to. And they have town hall meetings. You want to go get on an email list. See, because I get emails from my congresswoman. Okay. You want to go to that. You want to get on the email list. Go to house.gov. House.gov is the official website of the House of Representatives. Search for who your member of Congress is. Are you on their email list? Do you get notified when they have town hall meetings or virtual town hall meetings because of COVID? You want to show up. Now, I'm on the board of Grits and Politics here in Detroit. So a lot of the politicians come to our meetings. That's how I met Brenda Lawrence. Okay. A lot of them come to our meetings. That's how I met her. And one of her staff members said, okay, he said, give me a card. I'm going to put you on their email list. This is our money. This is a reallocation of taxpayer dollars. This is a reallocation of taxpayer dollars. Now, we just going to sit back and say, they ain't doing this, they ain't doing that, they ain't doing this. Or we going to say, how the hell we going to get this money? Because that's what I focus on. How the hell we going to get this money? Because somebody going to get this money. Why shouldn't it be us? The administration said it will increase the share of federal contracts directed to small disadvantaged businesses by 50% by the year 2026, seeking to lower barriers to entry and allow more traditionally underserved entrepreneurs to compete. Now, some people, no matter what happens, they just gonna complain. You know why? Because their brain has been wired not to take advantage of opportunities, but to complain, not to accomplish, but to complain, not to compete, but to complain. Those type of people I don't deal with. I don't have time for that type of BS. Go somewhere else with that BS. I don't have I don't have time for that. Okay. Because that negative energy drains your positive energy. Okay. Stay the hell away from me with that. All right. If you know me, I don't hang around a whole lot of people. I'm very selective about who I spend time with. All right. And if you hang around 4 broke people, you're going to be number 5. When you study social sciences, you'll find out that your annual income is usually the average of what your 4 or 5 closest friends make. Usually your annual income is like the average of what your 5 closest friends make. So if you want to make more money, you may have to get yourself some new friends, because when you get new friends that have a wired, their mindset is wired differently and is wired to take advantage of opportunities. I'm not talking about use people, exploit people, but is like wired for business, is wired to understand politics, is wired to understand opportunities, the conversation is different. The conversation is entirely different. Okay, so let's continue. Everybody share this broadcast on your social media platforms. Invite your friends to tune in as well. For those that don't know, I'm Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecturer, writer, and historian. And be sure to watch my show Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. to 12 midnight Eastern Standard Time, right here. And we also broadcast on 910 a.m. the Superstation WFDF here in Detroit. I'm a radio talk show host here in Detroit. And then we're also on Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network, $, the AHN show through Cash App, $, the AHN show through Cash App, and then through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show. This helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, finance the radio show, etc. And some of you already know this, but others don't. I will be in Atlanta for the Juneteenth Festival, the 9th annual Juneteenth Festival, June 18th through the 20th at Centennial Park. Okay, the Juneteenth Festival. So visit juneteenthatl.com for more information, juneteenthatl.com for more information. I'll be speaking there Saturday, June 18th, Saturday, June 19th, and Sunday, June 20th. I'll be speaking 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at the amphitheater. So visit juneteenthatl.com for more information. They have a fantastic, it's 3 days. They have a huge parade. There's thousands of people to come out. They have usually about 100 to maybe about 130 African-American, African and Caribbean vendors. Visit juneteenthatl.com for more information. They have speakers, entertainment, music. I talked to Bob Johnson, the organizer. He said Angie Stone is performing again this year. R&B singer Angie Stone. So it's going to be huge. And they have some other people lined up also. All right, let's continue. Okay, so the White House says the investment will result in an additional $100 billion going to these businesses in 5 years. The White House says the investment will result in an additional $100 billion going to these businesses in 5 years. So this means our businesses have to get ready. This means our businesses have to get ready, get paperwork in order, find out how to bid on contracts. Somebody's gonna get this money. Biden will also announce new details on the $10 billion community revitalization fund included in his infrastructure proposal. New details on the $10 billion community revitalization fund in his infrastructure proposal. So this is the about $2 trillion infrastructure bill. Moody's estimates is going to create 2.7 million jobs. He came down to 1.7 million because the Republicans came up with like about a $900 billion bill. Okay, but I don't think you're going to get any Republicans to jump on this. Hopefully they can push this bill through the budget reconciliation process where you only need 51 votes. So if you get 50 Democrats to vote for it, then Vice President Kamala Harris will be the tiebreaker because this infrastructure bill is going to be huge. All right. There's a fact sheet of the infrastructure bill at whitehouse.gov. Okay. There's a fact sheet of the infrastructure bill at whitehouse.gov. Now, so if you watch me daily, you know I break this stuff down for you on our show and give you sources so you can go research this as well. Let me pull something up here. All right. Okay, so we know Biden promoted initiatives to reduce the black wealth gap, and he tapped Vice President Kamala Harris to lead the push for voting rights in response to states imposing ballot restrictions. We saw what took place in Texas. We saw Democrats walked out of the state legislature, so Republicans didn't have a quorum, so they couldn't pass the voter restriction bill in Texas. But that's temporary. You got to pass the Voting Rights Act and the HR 1 and HR 4, I think it is. The John Lewis voting rights bill and the other one as well. Okay. All right, that's huge. I'm looking at the updates here from the Washington Post. Let me flip over to this for just a second. How's everybody doing? Share this broadcast in social media platforms. I know I'm on earlier than normal. Normally I'm on 11 p.m. at night, but I was researching this today, and I want to get to this on our show tonight. We're going to deal with. I'm going to talk about the documentary on the History Channel, Tulsa Race Massacre, 1921, because I watched it 3 times. So we're going to talk some about that. Biden commemorates the 100th anniversary of Tulsa Race Massacre. It's from June 1st, 2021. President Joe Biden on Tuesday commemorated the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. He said he called it he said, as painful as it is, only in remembrance do wounds heal. We have to choose to remember, memorialize what happened in Tulsa so it can't be erased. While in Oklahoma, Biden promoted initiatives to reduce the black-white wealth gap and said he tapped Vice President Kamala Harris to lead the push for voting rights in response to states imposing ballot restrictions. Okay, let's go back to this. This is exactly what we've been talking about here. All right, I want to go back to the Axios article. Okay, so Biden will also announce new details on the $10 billion community revitalization fund included in his infrastructure proposal. The fund will target communities that suffer from the effects of persistent poverty, historic economic disinvestment, and ongoing displacement of longtime residents, the White House said. The fund will target communities that suffer from the effects of persistent poverty, historic economic disinvestment, and ongoing displacement of longtime residents. Another proposal will support the planning, removal, or retrofitting of existing transportation infrastructure that creates a barrier to community connectivity. Now, this is something huge. This is something that happened to Tulsa and other African American populated cities. This deals with infrastructure. This deals with the expressways as well. Another proposal will, quote, support the planning, removal, or retrofitting of existing transportation infrastructure that creates a barrier to community connectivity. Okay, so read this one here from Axios.com. Biden unveils plan to combat racial wealth gap on anniversary of Tulsa race massacre. Okay, so we have that one, and then we have the one from Washington Post, which was a really good article from the Washington Post. It's pretty detailed. This is, let's see, I think they updated this article. Originally it came out at 5 a.m. Yeah, they updated it. Let's look at the one from Washington Post. Tulsa, Biden to unveil plans to reduce racial wealth gap. This was updated 3:24 p.m. because it originally came out at 5 a.m. And I just want to hone in on a few things here. I made notes. Stand by. How's everybody doing? Let me zoom in on this because the font type is smaller. I want to look at, okay, let me skip over this. Like the president will offer. Okay, the president arrived in Tulsa on Tuesday afternoon and sat down with survivors of the massacre after touring the Greenwood Cultural Center, which honors the city's historic Black community. Biden plans to offer a raft of policies intended to bolster home ownership and help minority small businesses and entrepreneurs, and administration officials said. And I'm referring to my notes also on this, so just bear with me a little bit. They include using federal purchasing power to pump more money into minority-owned businesses and setting aside $10 billion in infrastructure funds to rebuild disadvantaged neighborhoods across the country. He also plans to shore up the Fair Housing Act in ways that will allow the agency to, quote, more vigorously enforce the law, a senior administration official said, with the goal of increasing Black home ownership, The policies, some that have already been announced, are intended to show that Biden is providing some action rather than mere commemoration in Tulsa to support the Black community in Tulsa. The policies will affect the entire country, but they are designed to boost communities like Tulsa, administration officials said, discussing the president's plan on background during a conference call with reporters Monday night. That means on background means anonymously. Biden's aide said this will mark the first time a sitting U.S. president has gone to Tulsa to commemorate the events. Now, Biden's proposals drew immediate criticism from the NAACP, whose leader Derek Johnson said the president's plan omitted canceling student debt, which so far it doesn't deal with canceling student debt. One of the most effective ways to shrink the racial wealth gap, according to some researchers, canceling student debt. Now, Derek Johnson, president and executive director of the NAACP, said components of the plan are encouraging, but it fails to address the student loan debt crisis disproportionately affects African Americans. You cannot begin to address the racial wealth gap without addressing the student loan debt crisis. You cannot begin to address the racial wealth gap without addressing the student loan debt crisis. Although he applauded Biden's focus on home ownership as a way to build wealth, Derek Johnson pointed out that many African Americans simply won't qualify for needed loans because of a high debt to income ratio. That's particularly true, he said, among government workers. He went on to say, quote, that must be addressed if there's going to be a question of dealing with the racial wealth gap. Derek Johnson supports cutting as much as $50,000 per person in student debt, but said it is not a magic number. $50,000 is not a magic number. Now, during his campaign, Biden said he supported erasing $10,000 per person in federal student loan debt, but he has done little publicly. To move forward on that agenda item in the early phase of his presidency. It's been about 140 days now. During the call with reporters Monday night, May 31st, administration aides were pressed repeatedly about omitting student loan forgiveness from the president's plan. An administration official said, I certainly appreciate the interest in the topic and it's useful to hear a sustained interest on this call. in April of 2021 during a political playbook interview. White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain said that President Biden had requested a memo to determine whether the administration has the ability to wipe out student debt via executive action. Okay, so this is one of the questions. Now, Biden committed to wiping out $10,000 of student loan debt by executive action. Activists are saying he has the authority by executive action to do $50,000 of student loan debt. Biden has said he doesn't think he has the authority to do $50,000 through executive action. Now, Congress can discharge student loan debt. Congress can do that. I think you probably need 60 votes in the Senate unless they can push that through the budget reconciliation process. Originally you can use the budget reconciliation process in the Senate twice to push bills through with a simple majority, 51 votes. Democratic Senate staffers reviewed the text of the rule. They went to the Senate parliamentarian, and the parliamentarian came to the conclusion that you could use it 4 times in a 2-year term as opposed to 2 times. So the American Rescue Plan was pushed through the budget reconciliation process, and no Republicans in the Senate voted for it, or the House of Representatives for that matter. So discharging student loan debt, if you can get it through the budget reconciliation process, I'm not sure if it qualifies. If it does, you would need 51 votes. If all Democrats vote for it, and those who caucus with the Democrats, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont and Senator Angus King of Maine, I think it's Maine, Angus King. And if Joe Manchin of West Virginia votes for it, and Kristen Sinema of Arizona votes for it, then a tiebreaker vote would be Vice President Kamala Harris, and you can push it through that way. I don't know if it qualifies for the budget reconciliation process. Hopefully it does. But executive order doesn't have to go through Congress. So this has been a sticking point here over how much can the president discharge through executive order. So in April, during a political playbook interview, White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain said that Biden had requested a memo to determine whether the administration has the ability to, okay, I didn't want to go back to that. Whether the administration has the ability to wipe out student debt via executive action. As many activists have said, executive order, executive action. At the time, White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain said the memo would be done in weeks, quote unquote weeks. There was no update on Monday, May 31st about the status of the memo, according to administration officials. Now, when we look at the median wealth of white households in the United States, the median household wealth for white households is $189,000 in 2019. For African American households, it was $24,000. Okay, according to a report from the Center for American Progress. The gap widened in 2020 as the coronavirus pandemic hit minority communities, non-white communities harder than white ones, according to the report. So you're dealing with $189,100 in 2019 in median household wealth for white families and $24,000 for African American families. Okay, let me see here. So Biden's speech laid out some of his plans to attack the racial wealth gap, including directing about $100 billion in federal contracts over 5 years to small disadvantaged businesses. We talked about that. According to administration official, currently about 10% of federal contract funds go to these types of businesses. All right. And if I remember correctly, if we go back and look at that one, they want to increase that to 50% by 2026. That is, yeah. Was that 50? Let me check. Hold on. Yeah. That was in the article from Axios. Let me flip back over to the audio from Axios for just a second. The administration said it will increase the share of federal contracts directed to small disadvantaged businesses by 50% by 2026, seeking to lower barriers to entry. Okay, so they're going to increase the share of federal contracts to small disadvantages, increase the share by 50%. According to the text of this, so increase the share by 50%. Okay, so it's going to go up to, it appears, overall getting 15% of the contracts instead of 10%, if this text is correct. Let's go back to the reporting from the Washington Post. Biden's speech will lay out some of his plans to attack including directing about $100 billion in federal contracts over 5 years to small disadvantaged businesses, according to an administration official. Currently, about 10% of federal contract funds go to these types of businesses, the official said. So according to the reporting from Axios, and I want to see the actual language of the actual proposals, but according to the reporting from Axios, it is increasing the share of federal contracts directed to small disadvantaged businesses by 50% by 2026, as opposed to increasing the share to 50% by 2026, if you understand the difference. So if you're at 10% now and they increase it by 50%, that means you're going to be getting 15% of the contracts by 2026, as opposed to increasing the share the share from 10% to 50%. Okay, I just want to make that designation as I understand it right now, based upon the article from the Washington Post, or based upon the reporting from Axios. All right, let's go back to the Washington Post. This is why I read different sources as well. Okay, so the plan to dedicate about $10 billion to civic infrastructure is intended to be used to reclaim vacant storefronts and buildings and provide low-cost office space for community services, an administration official said. The funds can also be used to clean toxic waste dumps and create new parks. Now, Biden also wants to target about $15 billion in transportation funding toward neighborhoods that have been historically cut off of public transit. So this, for people who don't own cars, this can make it harder for them to get to work, harder for them to keep steady employment, etc. Get to doctor's appointments, all different types of things like this. On housing, Biden will launch an interagency effort to address inequality in housing appraisals, which are persistently lower than similar homes in white neighborhoods, and another major factor that erodes wealth. We talked about that as well. 150 African American households have $156 billion less in appraised value compared to comparable white households. The Department of Housing and Urban Development will publish 2 directives intended to strengthen the Fair Housing Act by reinstating a rule as the discriminatory effects standard, which triggers liability under the act regardless of intent. The other will empower HUD recipients to determine when a fair housing problem exists. In both cases, HUD, Housing and Urban Development, aims to return to traditional interpretations of the Fair Housing Act, of 1968, which reverses the last administration's attempts, Donald Trump. This reverses the Trump administration's attempts to weaken the Fair Housing Act's protections, said a senior administration official. Now, we also know that in 2020, Benedict Donald scheduled his first campaign rally of the pandemic, a huge indoor event. He scheduled it in Tulsa, Oklahoma on June 19th. The plans raised racial tensions at a moment when the coronavirus was surging. Under pressure, Trump moved the rally to June 20th as opposed to June 19th. Now, if you remember, he also was set to accept the Republican nomination for president in Jacksonville, Florida, on the 60th anniversary of what was known as Axe Handle Saturday, when a white mob angry at African American civil rights activists and protesters began beating African Americans in the street. What happened was the Ku Klux Klan handed out baseball bats and axe handles. That's why it's called Axe Handle Saturday. They handed this out to an angry white mob to beat civil rights activists. Okay, that's why it's called Axe Handle Saturday. Axe Handle Saturday, the Klan's vicious attack on black protesters in Florida 60 years ago. Okay, this is Axe Handle Saturday because we talked about this on the show when this took place. This is an article from Washington Post, August 27th, 2020. The Florida Klansmen had armed themselves with axe handles. It was August 27th, 1960, a year of lunch counter sit-ins by civil rights activists. The opening salvo had been fired on February 1st when 4 black college students sat down at a whites-only lunch counter inside of F.W. Woolworth 5 and Dime store in Greensboro, North Carolina. Okay, that's February 1st, 1960. All right. So when young black people began staging sit-ins at a whites-only Woolworth lunch counter in downtown Jacksonville, Florida, that summer, 1960, the Ku Klux Klan organized. On the morning of what became known notoriously as Axe Handle Saturday, more than 200 white men wielding axe handles launched a vicious attack on black protesters and passersby. Before pulling the plug on an in-person convention in Jacksonville, Florida, Donald Trump was scheduled to speak there on the 60th anniversary of Axe Handle Saturday, angering local activists. Now he will accept the nomination in a speech from the White House, which is surrounded by fencing after repeated Black Lives Matter protests. In 1960, the Ku Klux Klan attack in Florida signaled a sharp turn in the cascading sit-in movement from spontaneous acts of racism to coordinated white supremacist brutality, according to Stanford University history professor Claiborne Carson. As the protesters began to achieve some success in the Upper South, then in the Deep South areas, resistance became more intense, said Professor Claiborne Carson, who is also founding director of the Martin Luther King Jr. Research and Education Institute at Stanford University. The lunch counter sit-ins that spring inspired members of the Youth Council of the Jacksonville NAACP to launch nonviolent direct action of their own. Okay, so read the rest of this. This deals with Axe Handle Saturday, okay, August 27th, 1960. Okay, Axe Handle Saturday in Jacksonville, Florida. That's from the Washington Post. Okay, and read this article in full. In Tulsa speech, Biden to unveil plans to reduce black wealth gap. That's from Washington Post by Annie Linsky for the Washington Post. Okay, and then lastly, there is one from CNN, and it's just, I think, two things I want to highlight there because most of it is redundant. Back in November 15th, 2019, there was dealing with student loan debt. Back November 15th, 2019, there was a good article from CBS News that dealt with the crushing student loan debt that African Americans are dealing with. Student loan debt weighs heavier on black borrowers. Student loan debt weighs heavier on black borrowers. This is from CBS.com, CBS News. Let's go to this one here. This is why discharging student loan debt is so important. And then this also ties into the racial wage gap, where you have African American women who make, depending upon the year, 62 to 67 cents on average on every dollar that the average white male makes. It takes the African American woman on average 20 months to make the same amount of money that the average white male makes in 12 months. And African American men make about 80 cents on the dollar, something like that. Also, okay, student loan debt weighs heavier on black borrowers, Fed says. It's from November 15, 2019. The mounting student loan debt crushing borrowers across the country is having an even harsher impact on African Americans in places like Brooklyn and Chicago when compared to white borrowers, according to research economists at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. They cite also that lower pay is negatively impacting African Americans as well as compounding the problem. Part of the problem, hold on. Okay, part of the problem is that African Americans bring home a relatively lower income, and can't devote as much money to payments, the Fed researchers say. Another fact, and a lot of that has to deal with the racial wage gap. Another factor is that African American college students or sometimes even drop out with a much higher student loan bill than members of other racial groups. Americans hold more than $1.5 trillion in student loan debt, according to the Federal Reserve data released in November 2019. People living in lower income areas where there's a higher concentration of African Americans, such as Detroit, Washington, D.C., and Newark, New Jersey, tend to have higher student loan balances and are at greater risk of defaulting. Borrowing rates are somewhat higher in areas with the majority of black residents at 23%, compared with 17% of Hispanic majority zip codes and 14% in white majority zip codes, the Fed researchers said. I'm looking at my notes on this here. There's just a few things I want to highlight in this article. The Fed data show that people living in predominantly black areas of the country have an average student loan balance topping $37,000. The average white student's balance is $34,000. Black borrowers are twice as likely at 18% to default on their student loans than whites at defaulting at a rate of 9%, the data shows. African Americans typically holding $37,000 in student loans is particularly troubling because people in those communities are also reporting their average annual income as $38,000. The Fed researchers said also. Okay, read the rest of this article here. Almost 85% of African Americans have student loan debt compared to 69% of whites, according to uh, to the North Carolina nonprofit organization, the Center for Responsible Lending. The Brookings Institute reported that 38% of Black students who entered college in 2004 defaulted on their loans compared to just 12% of white students. And then this negatively impacts your credit, makes it harder to buy a home, get a car at a decent interest rate. It has a ripple effect. Okay, it has a ripple effect. Okay, okay. So read that article from CBS News. There's also one from the Grio around that time that dealt with student loan debt as well. How's everybody doing? Share this broadcasting and social media platforms. Invite your friends to tune in also. If you like this type of information, you support the African History Network, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App. Also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show. And you can still register for the online course that I teach dealing with history on Saturdays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, where they didn't teach you in school. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, where they didn't teach you in school. This is a 9-week online course that I teach. We deal with thousands of years of history, and we deal with what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place as well. We deal with ancient African history. We deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors. And with the Moors taken in Europe, the teachings from the Nile Valley region of Africa, and this is going to bring Europe out of the Dark Ages. So if you go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, we have the information right on the homepage. We have information for our daily radio show. We are Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. to 12 midnight Eastern Standard Time. Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm doing an early broadcast right now. Click here to listen to audio podcasts of my shows. Here to read articles I've written. We have information for the online class here. Next class is Saturday, June 5th, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Click here to enroll. Class is 54% off right now. It's regularly $130 because we're like about halfway through the class. It's on sale $60. I do the class live Saturdays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All the sessions are archived. All the sessions are archived. You can go back and watch it over and over again. Okay. All the sessions are archived. So if you miss anything, you can go back and watch it. So you don't have to worry. And even after the course is over with, you still have access to the class. All right. Lastly, I want to look at this article here from CNN.com. Now, I want to talk about this today because I'm not going to have time to do with it on tonight's show. I think we're going to have a full show, and I want to try to keep tonight's show to 1 hour, hopefully. Biden memorializes Tulsa victims on 100th anniversary. This was not a riot. This was a massacre, Biden said in his speech. And then it goes through and lays out the policies that we talked about. So I just want to highlight a couple of things here. During an afternoon speech, the president announced a series of new actions his administration has taken to reduce the racial wealth gap, as he memorialized the hundreds of African Americans who were killed by the white mob. Let's see here. Okay, Biden announced that Vice President Kamala Harris will lead the administration's efforts on voting rights. The Biden administration has been consistently critical of Republican-led state legislatures like Georgia and Texas, efforts to pass restrictive voting laws, which the White House says makes it harder for Americans to vote. In Tulsa, Biden also met with surviving members of the community and toured the Greenwood Cultural Center. Biden announced that he would use federal purchasing power to grow federal contracting with small disadvantaged businesses, many of them minority owned, by 50%, grow it by 50%. The White House said this would translate to an additional $100 billion over 5 years. Okay, so we talked about that $10 billion community revitalization. I want to go here. The fund will support adapting vacant buildings and storefronts to provide low-cost space for services and community entrepreneurs, including health centers, arts and cultural spaces, job training programs, business incubators, and community marketplaces. It will also support removing toxic waste to create new parks and community gardens. New competitive grants totaling $15 billion will target neighborhoods where people have been cut off from jobs, schools, and businesses because of previous transportation investments. Officials said, and the American Jobs Plan will invest $31 billion to support minority-owned small businesses. Now, okay, we talked about that. U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. We talked about that. Marshall Fudge. 2 fair housing rules. We discussed that. Let's see. He's going to President Biden. The administration is also laying out new specifics on the new neighborhood homes tax credit in the American Jobs Plan, the $1.9 trillion American Jobs. Oh, that's right. That's the American Rescue Plan, $1.9 trillion. This is the American Jobs Plan. This is about $2 trillion. Okay. Which is intended to attract private investment in the development of affordable homes for low and moderate income home buyers and homeowners. Today's rollout also includes new details on the $5 billion Unlocking Possibilities program, a new grant that awards funding to jurisdictions that take steps to reduce barriers to producing affordable housing and expand housing choices for people with low or moderate income. Okay, so they talk about Derek Johnson, who was critical of Biden's new proposals to advance racial equity. He said they failed to address the student loan debt crisis, which he said was at the core of the racial wealth gap. We talked about that. Okay, the White House, okay, student loan debt continues to suppress the economic prosperity of Black Americans across the nation. The White House on Tuesday pointed to the president's proposed investments in historically Black colleges and universities. In response, the American Families Plan, which is included in the president's budget, includes a historic $46 billion of investment in HBCUs, tribal colleges and universities, and minority serving institutions. These institutions are critical to helping underserved students move to the top of the income ladder. White House Principal Deputy Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre told reporters aboard Air Force One. Karine Jean-Pierre added, quote, President Biden is calling for a historic investment in affordability through subsidized tuition and expanding institutional grants. Okay, so, they want to make college free for people who have household incomes of $125,000 or less. They want to make college more affordable, all that. That's good. That's good. But you got to deal with the $1.6 trillion already in student loan debt. You have to deal with the 1.6, the $46 billion investment. That's all good. That's going forward. You have to deal with the crushing student loan debt that already exists, that's behind us. You have to deal with that also. All right. And this, okay, you rest yourself. I just want to focus in on the policy issues. So read this one here. This article was updated from CNN because it last update was 10:59 a.m. It's updated. Okay, they updated it after Biden spoke. Biden memorializes Tulsa's victims on 100th anniversary. This was not a riot. This was a massacre from CNN.com. Okay, so this is an example of how elections have consequences. This is why we have to push after the election to push these issues, and to continue to push in all different interest groups or what have you, are putting pressure on the White House, putting pressure on Congress to push their issues. We have to do the same thing. All right, let me see. I think I got through all the articles I want to get through. But this is now, of course, in Tulsa, and I said this on my show, I said this on Roland Martin's show Friday, May 28th. So I'm a panelist on Roland Martin and Filtered every Friday. I said it on my show. Reparations, repairing the damage, doesn't have to just go to the 3 survivors of the Tulsa Race Massacre. It doesn't have to just go to the descendants. It has to go to the people of North Tulsa, the Greenwood community, because the entire community was attacked. It wasn't just 3 people. The entire community was attacked. The entire community is still suffering today from not just the attack, but also the damage that the expressways have done. The entire community is still has suffered from redlining and things like this. So you can't just deal with reparations for the 3 survivors who are 100 years old, 106 and 107. You got to deal with restitution for the entire community, because the entire community is suffering. And that has to come from local government, state, as well as federal government, because the expressways came through. That's federal. That's federal government. Now, it's probably complicit with local, but that's federal government running the expressways through. All right. Hey, if you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show, or at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We just posted a link here. This helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, pay some of the bills, etc. Broadcast 6 days a week. All right. And when you do it through Cash App, be sure to type in $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show, SHOW. Be sure to type in SHOW. It'll show my picture and it'll say Michael. Because somebody set up a fake African History Network Cash App account. I've already reported them. That's not me. It's similar to my handle, but it's not me. I'll be in Atlanta June 18th through the 20th for the 9th annual Juneteenth Festival. Juneteenth Atlanta Parade and Music Festival at Centennial Park. Okay. Visit JuneteenthATL.com, JuneteenthATL.com. Be sure to visit my vendor booth, and I'll be speaking at the amphitheater Saturday and Sunday, 3 p.m. To 4 p.m. I'll be doing presentations there. So I'll be in Atlanta for that. Visit JuneteenthATL.com for more information for the Juneteenth Atlanta Parade and Music Festival. All right, we have to get out of here. Remember, the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Hopefully you learned a lot today. Go read these articles yourself. Go read these policies, things like that yourself. Remember, right now is correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. And we'll talk to you later. Peace.